Let me share a real-life story that happened in the year of 2019. My wife's job required us to move to a small part in the city of Oklahoma, so we packed our bags and started a fresh chapter in our lives. When we arrived at our new home, as we celebrated our housewarming party, the first person that came and greeted us was Alice, our neighbor. She was a burly, friendly lady in her 50s, always ready with a warm smile. Alice also went out of her way to make us feel welcomed in our new neighborhood. She, too, would always, without fail, bring us fresh fruits from her garden and treats us to her homemade cookies every other day, which, by the way, were absolutely delicious. Alice also had a soft spot for stray cats, or so we thought. It was something she couldn't resist. She said, "There is this habit that whenever she spotted a cat in need, she'd bring it home to nurture and care for them. As cat lover ourselves, we approve." However, we noticed that there was something peculiar about Alice. Not even once she'd ever talked about her family, even though she lived alone in a huge house with a car and a motorcycle that she even confessed to not knowing how to drive. As curious as we were, we decided not to pry into her personal life. One particular night, an odd event unfolded. We were both jolted awake by a strange sound coming from Alice's backyard. It was well past midnight, and the noise resembled someone digging with a shovel. Curious, both my wife and I went to the room at the back and peered out the window to see what was happening. To our surprise, there was Alice, laboring away in her backyard, digging a hole in the ground. She placed something inside it, but we couldn't quite make out what it was from our vantage point. Afterward, she covered it up with soil. It left us wondering, what could she possibly be doing at 2 a.m.? Baffled and somewhat unnerved, we eventually returned to our beds when we saw Alice re-enter her house. We tried to push the strange sight out of our minds and go back to sleep. Morning came, and Alice, as per usual, came over. She presented us with a large jar of her freshly baked cookies. It was her customary gesture of hospitality. Unable to contain my curiosity, I couldn't help but ask her if she had managed to get any rest the previous night, considering we had seen her hard at work in the backyard so late. Her reaction was immediate and rather unsettling. Her friendly demeanor turned defensive, and her expression seemed to darken as she explained that she had been attempting to create natural fertilizer using leftover vegetables. It was a flimsy excuse, but we decided to smile and pretend to believe her. As we turned to leave, we couldn't help but notice Alice is still standing in front of our door, glaring at us with an intense, almost angry-like aura. Despite the unsettling events of that morning, we couldn't resist the temptation of her delicious cookies. We served ourselves a few pieces, preparing to enjoy them with some milk for breakfast. However, our appetites were quickly ruined when I bit into something hard and unchewable. I spat it out, revealing what looked like a small bone. My wife had a similar experience, discovering a stack of what appeared to be fur in her cookie. Could it be cat fur? We assumed that maybe there's too many cats in her house and the fur got involved somehow. We wondered. Our discomfort grew as we pondered the presence of these strange elements in the cookies. We decided to brush it aside, tried minding our own business. Although I really wanted to ask her what's going on, from then on, after the continuous digging activity at 2 a.m. every other night, a slew of unsettling questions began swirling in our minds. The eerie expression on Alice's face, her late-night activities, and the bizarre contents of the cookies left us feeling increasingly uneasy around her. One fine Monday, my wife finally returned to work at her newly transferred office, leaving me home alone. I had taken the whole month off work to sort out the house. Unexpectedly, a knock on the door interrupted my chores. I approached the door cautiously and inquired about the visitor. It was Alice who requested my help in changing a light bulb in her kitchen. I agreed without hesitation. Before accompanying her to her house, I managed to send a quick message to my wife, informing her of my whereabouts and mentioning that I will be back home soon and had left my phone at home. Upon arriving at Alice's house, I was genuinely surprised to find no cats in sight. She said she put them in another room temporarily to clean the house easily. There isn't any sound of the animals either. She promised to show them to me after we changed the light bulb. My curiosity piqued. I eagerly agreed. Once the task was completed, Alice offered me a glass of freshly made watermelon juice. I remembered, however, after drinking just half of the juice, a sudden drowsiness overcame me, and my limbs grew heavy. My vision blurred, and I struggled to stay awake. As I glanced at Alice, she wore an eerie grin on her face, pretending to be concerned. My body eventually gave in, and I then totally lost consciousness. When I was awake, I found myself bound tightly to a wooden chair in a dimly lit, unfamiliar room. I realized that this might have been the basement of the house. My gaze then fell upon an elderly man chained to a bed in a dark corner. As I slowly got adjusted to the dimness of the lights, I saw that he is a frail and weak old man. He turned his eyes toward me and spoke with a subdued voice. "I'm sorry for what my wife has done to you." Confusion and fear gripped me as I inquired if he was Alice's husband. He confirmed it, and his story unfolded. It turned out that Alice had developed severe mental illness for years, following the tragic death of their beloved son. Ironically, she despised cats, while her husband loved them dearly. One fateful day, her husband had spotted an injured cat on the road, and without thinking too much, he rushed to help, leaving their 10-year-old son in the middle of a traffic in the car. Tragedy struck when an out-of-control truck collided with their vehicle, killing their son instantly. This devastating incident drove Alice to blame her husband for their son's death, and her mental health deteriorated rapidly. In a twisted act of vengeance, she began to punish him by confining him to an underground storage room, slowly forcing him to consume live kittens and cats' raw organs, depriving him of water and mostly feeding him with cat urine and occasionally some fruit juice. It also turns out that she had trapped and, unfortunately, tortured 7 people to death who were just snooping around her personal life. I felt terrified, and in the meantime, having sympathy for both of them somehow. As Alice's husband continued to share his harrowing story, suddenly we both heard footsteps approaching the room. Alice was returning. My heart raced with fear as she entered, her eyes filled with rage. She brought a tray of food and insisted that I eat it. I hesitated, refusing to open my mouth. After a fierce struggle, she grew furious, claiming that it was made from cat meat and insisting that I had previously enjoyed her cookies. So, why wouldn't I eat this food? Nausea washed over me. I proceeded to ask her why she was doing this to us, and she said it was because I knew her secret, also mentioning that good things are meant to be shared with neighbors. She also said that she was going to let me starve if I didn't eat her food. Then suddenly came a ringing on her doorbell. Good, there's someone here to help us. Or so I thought. After gagging my mouth forcefully with a duct tape, Alice proceeded to her front door. I was anxiously filled with hope as I imagined the police, or perhaps a concerned neighbor standing at the door, ready to save us from this nightmare. But when Alice opened the door again, my hopes were dashed. Peeking through a small window from the basement, I can make out and conclude that it's old man Peter, who is also a longtime resident in the neighborhood. He was also there during our housewarming party. Alice then greeted him as she asked him to make himself at home. I couldn't believe my eyes as I watched them exchange pleasantries and saw Peter enter her house without a hint of suspicion. How can Alice be so casual during this time? Could they have been working together? Could Alice have asked for backup to finish me off? Fear and confusion consumed me as I remained bound to the wooden chair in the dimly lit room. My mind raced with thoughts of betrayal and conspiracy. The pieces of the puzzle didn't quite fit together, and I have never felt so confused before. I strained to hear their conversation. They spoke in hushed tones, making it difficult to decipher their words. It seemed like an eternity passed as I listened anxiously, but I couldn't discern any concrete information. Minutes felt like hours until I heard footsteps approaching the room once more. This time, it was Peter who entered, wearing an expression that was an unsettling mix of concern and curiosity. I couldn't help but wonder if he had any inkling of the horrors that lurked behind Alice's seemingly friendly facade. Peter's gaze locked onto me, bound and helpless, and I could see the gears turning in his mind as he processed the unsettling scene before him. He exchanged a few more words with Alice, then she left the scene after. He then turned his attention back to me. With a tentative but determined voice, he said, "Don't worry, I'm here to help you. Alice, she's not whom she seems to be." It was a risky move, considering Alice's presence in the house, but it offered a glimmer of hope. As Peter approached, he revealed a small pocket knife hidden in his hand, carefully concealed from Alice. With deft precision, he began to cut the ropes that bound me. My heart raced with a mixture of gratitude and anxiety. Could I trust him? Isn't he an accomplice? Was he truly here to rescue me? Or was this all part of some elaborate ruse? With my hands finally free, Peter whispered urgently, "We need to act quickly. Alice is dangerous, and we don't have much time." He gestured for me to follow him, and we silently made our way through the darkened house, avoiding any creaky floorboards that might give us away. Tension hung in the air like a heavy fog as we navigated through the house. Every step we took seemed to reverberate in the eerie silence of the house. Peter led the way, his eyes darting around, searching for any sign of Alice. As we reached the ground floor, our hearts sank. There she was, with a Mossberg 500 in her hand, waiting for us. Pointing at us with a wicked smile, Alice declared, "You thought you could escape, but you're trapped now." Peter and I exchanged a desperate glance, realizing that we were cornered. Alice's madness had driven her to a point where there's no more reasoning or talking her out of it. Just as she was about to advance towards us, a loud noise echoed from the front of the house, startling us all. It was the sound of a car pulling into the driveway. Panic flashed across Alice's face as she turned to investigate the source of the disturbance. To our immense relief, it was my wife who had returned from work earlier than expected. She had grown concerned when she couldn't reach me on my phone and decided to come home to check on me. As my wife kept banging on the door of the house, she was also accompanied by the police, who had been informed by her about the dire situation. The police were shouting for her to stand down, and we heard that the K-9 unit was also on hand, ready to assist. Alice, confused by what's happening, turned to the door and hurriedly wanting to bolt the door. But before she could reach, the front door came crashing down, and in an instant, both Peter and I immediately took the opportunity to pounce and overpower while disarming her. The police then rushed in and took Alice into custody. Her house was then thoroughly searched. They also informed us that Alice was the prime suspect in their radar all the time. But due to lack of evidence and cover-ups, they can't take any action. Until now. As Alice was led away in handcuffs, she cast one last hateful glance in our direction. We had survived her twisted plot, thanks to the quick thinking of Peter and the unwavering determination of my wife and the police. Peter, on the other hand, also turned in and taken into custody for assisting in her previous crimes. Overwhelmed by guilt and remorse each time it happens, Peter decided to collaborate with the police, providing them with vital information and assistance to help solve the crime. Later, we also learned that he had been given a lighter sentence too, albeit being sentenced to 30 years of prison. In the aftermath of the ordeal, we learned the full extent of Alice's madness and the horrors she had inflicted on her husband and the victims. He was finally free from her clutches, and with the support of the community, he began the long journey of recovery. Our neighborhood also slowly returned to a sense of normalcy, and now we couldn't help but be more cautious about the people we let into our lives. Till this day, we will be extra cautious with new faces and finding it hard to trust new people, and learned to start minding our own business. Hey friends, thanks for listening. Look forward, subscribe, and click on the notification bell for more future stories. Also, share your thoughts in the comments below. Got any stories to share? Feel free to send us your stories through the email provided in the description. Peace.